Hey guys, and welcome to Money Talks News, the podcast that makes you richer one day at a time. Did you know Americans owe more than $1.1 trillion in credit card debt? And a good portion of that is because too many of us are using plastic to pay for basic necessities like rent and food. But no matter where your debt comes from, one thing's for sure, it's stressful. According to one survey, more than half of U.S. adults with debt say they feel stressed because of it. So, what can you do if you're feeling overwhelmed? Consumer attorney and debt relief expert Leslie Tayne is here to save our day. She specializes in law-based debt solutions, and today she's going to help us with the steps to take when we're feeling overwhelmed by debt. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And of course, we also have Aaron Freeman, and Miranda is here with us. Hey, Miranda. Hey, Aaron.
Hey. Let's solve my debt problems.
Let's solve your debt problem. Does anyone? I know you two have both had debt problems far in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
But luckily, those days are far behind.
Let me ask you this, Leslie. You deal with people who have debt issues a lot. Why do you think so many people are overwhelmed by debt these days?
There are so many reasons why people get into debt, stay in debt, and then have it overwhelm them. It could be anything from life changes, family changes, dynamics like medical issues, divorce, change of jobs, the post-pandemic with the costs, with inflation. There could be mismanagement, and there could be a lot of reasons why people end up in debt. From my perspective, I'm not judgmental. I've done thousands and thousands of cases of debt, but it does happen. It is part of life, but there are lots of great solutions.
Cool. And we're going to talk about those solutions, but let me ask you something. It's going to sound like a stupid question, but how do you know when you're in trouble? How do you know when you need help? How do you know this isn't just the way life is? I mean, how are you supposed to figure out whether you're in trouble or not?
That's a good question because so many people do live with overwhelming debt. Every week they live paycheck to paycheck, or they're just paying bills and there's really nothing left over. And that becomes a way of life. I think the time comes when you realize that you're having an issue related to debt and it's time to get help is when you start to see that, the balances on your debt balances don't go down. When you start to have difficulty meeting your financial obligations, there's no money left after you've paid all of the bills, or you're really anticipating your paycheck because there's nothing left over, or you have nothing in savings. I think those are some key situations and red flags that you really starting to have an issue and it's time to seek some help.
Many years ago, I did an interview with a bankruptcy attorney, and I said, how do you know when you're supposed to file bankruptcy versus just working out some other way to pay off your debts? And he said, if your monthly payments are higher than your income or available income, then you should consider bankruptcy. Did I remember that right? Is that true?
So that is one test. What we try to do for most clients with debt is avoid bankruptcy. Bankruptcy can be kind of an extreme circumstance. It could impact business, certainly impacts your credit for up to 10 years, and it can have other long-lasting implications and less flexibility. So it's not really just about not being able to pay the bills or pay out more, because sometimes even though you're paying out more money than what's coming in, some adjustments in the budget and some changes can help you to reduce your outlay of cash and get you out of debt. Sometimes it's just refiguring what's happening within your financial circumstances, and that reconfiguration could lead to financial freedom.
Now, let me ask you this too. Let's talk about the different ways of getting out of debt. But before we do though, here's another question that's really common. There's good debt and there's bad debt, people say. Is that true? And if so, what distinguishes between good and bad?
Definitely there's good debt and bad debt. And frankly, good debt can become bad debt, and some bad debt can actually become good debt. And with that said, so let's talk about what good debt is. Good debt is something that helps your credit score. That's something that brings something to your life. Perhaps it's a house, a car, even student loans. All of that starts out as good debt. You get something for the money that you borrow, and you have good intentions. You plan to pay it. You are paying it. The challenge and the bad debt comes in when that starts to change. You no longer have the ability to meet those obligations, or you didn't budget appropriately. Interest rates change, or some other factor interferes with that. And now all of a sudden it's become a strain and you're not paying it. that good debt all of a sudden became bad debt because it's now negatively impacting your credit and your finances.
Okay, cool. I wrote a book called Life or Debt many years ago, decades ago, as a matter of fact. And in that book, I basically said that good debt makes you richer and bad debt makes you poorer. And that's
yes.
overly simplified.
And similarly, in my book, Life and Debt, we talk the same topic about it.
You have a book called Life and Debt?
Yes, I do.
You're kidding. That's really funny.
That's funny. I got a book called Living Life While in Debt. No, I'm joking.
It's a good title, though.
Okay, so anyway, let's talk about how to get out of debt. Even maybe when it's not overwhelming or when it is, whatever. If we want to approach debt, we want to get out of it as quickly as possible. Let's talk about some ways of doing that. What would be the first thing that came to your mind when I said that, Leslie?
So the first way to get out of debt really is to look at your budget. And most people don't want a budget. It's really taxing for a lot of reasons. Emotionally, it's straining. It's, if you're short on funds, you don't want to be looking at it. So there's a lot of psychological implications to the budgeting process. And it involves math, which most people don't really care to do. So, and it's not natural. It wasn't taught on a regular basis. It just doesn't come naturally to most people. But honestly, without understanding your budget, there's no way to get out of debt. There just isn't. You need to understand what's coming into your household and what's going out. You need to categorize the monies that are going out into different categories: wants, needs, certain types of expenses. And then you have to take a look and see, well, what are and then prioritize. What is my most important debt that has to be paid? My house, my car, my food bills, for simplistic purposes. And then go from there. What's next? And then that's the only way to start. If you don't understand the budget, you don't understand the monies that come in. And then a lot of people have fluctuating incomes, and that often makes it challenging. And my recommendation under those circumstances is work off the lowest common income. If your income fluctuates, you're a seasonal worker or you're a gig worker with 1099 and you have fluctuating income, you have to budget and live off of the lowest amount of money that comes in. Anything extra then comes in, then you can allocate for things like vacation funds or emergency funds or spending or paying down debt. But that's really the starting place.
Stacey and I have been doing these debt stories a long time, and a lot of the factors have changed. I don't know. I keep reading the articles. The vast majority of these debt holders are low income or even just slightly below middle class and then a little bit in the middle class. What are some of the extreme things that you tell these people? Because most of the times we always tell people the same thing over and over again. Do a budget, try to figure out what you can carve away, and do the pyramid scheme or the snowball thing. What happens if this all of a sudden caught up to you? Like you were living life, all of a sudden everything goes up, but your income hasn't gone up, and now you're using credit cards. But what's the extreme? I mean, do you start selling off your new car and get a used car? Do you suggest to people, you're going to have to move? Your place of living is just too expensive. I mean, what's the extreme of this to get people back on track?
So in my experience, I've been doing this for 25 years. You can't tell people you have to move, and you can't tell people you have to sell your car. It's like telling somebody to, stop, quit smoking, like right on the spot, or go on a diet immediately and stop eating carbs. It's not something where you can just rip the Band-Aid off and say, okay, do that, because these are habits. These are financial habits, and they are ingrained, and they're part of your day-to-day experience with your money. And so it has to be done gradually, and it needs to be done in a way that works for the individual. And that's why, there isn't one method that works for everybody. It's really, your financial DNA, what works for you. And in the people that I've worked with over the years, now there isn't one way that I would say, okay, this is the Leslie Tayne method, and this is the best and tried and true way to get out of debt. It just doesn't work like that. Every method, and there's combinations of methods that work at different times in your life. One month you might try one method, and the next month it makes sense to do another. It's that dynamic. So when you're looking at the situation, and I'm advising clients, we're looking at the big picture, and we're talking about goals. Short-term, long-term goals. What's the financial situation look like? What's changing in your circumstances? Where's the money coming from? Is it stable income? Is the house, does it make sense, your housing expenses? If you're over 50% on your housing expenses with your income, you're never going to make it, because those percentages just don't work. But if you can, where can you cut back? What makes sense in cutting back? many families today just simply can't cut back. Are there ways to add income to your household? Are there ways to make adjustments starting slow that can help you to a better place? For me to go and tell a client you have to sell a house, I mean, that's just not, first of all, it's not an appropriate solution under circumstances. Now, even my clients that come to me where their houses, where they're behind on their mortgage payments and they're going into foreclosure, sometimes even in those cases, the answer isn't just sell the house. In other cases, it does make sense. If you're in a circumstance where you can't make your mortgage payments and you have equity in your home, it might make sense at that time to sell the house and not necessarily buy another house. But then again, rentals these days are astronomical. Rental markets in very hot areas from South Florida to the New York area are very, very difficult to obtain in reasonable numbers. So sometimes the mortgage is actually less. And if you've had an interest rate and you've been one of the fortunate ones to have a refinance in the last 10 years where you have a 2 or 3 or 4% interest rate, refinancing, cashing out, or selling and buying another house then doesn't make sense because you're going to end up at 6, 7, 8, or 9% interest rates, and you're going to buy a lot less. Your money's just not going to go as far. So again, it's not black and white at all. We look at the totality of the circumstances and take each piece, marry them together, and then come up with a plan that makes sense, including the budget, not the expenses, and what's happening today, tomorrow, and in the future.
Yeah, it's not black and white, but did I understand you right? Did you say in your user experience, the biggest thing that you've come across is bad habits? Is the reason people get into debt?
Yep. Yeah, they're really bad. Most of it are bad habits, just not necessarily seeing the big picture. So running your personal finances is a mini business. So you have to look at it, take a step outside and look at it a little bit more from a bird's eye view, a business perspective. Your household is a mini business. So how is it running? Is it running efficiently? Is the person running it well? Does it need a joint venture? Again, if you look at it a little bit more detached from the emotional part of it, the challenge with finances is that many people are so emotionally attached to it that they can't make clear and concise decisions, and it becomes very difficult. And so I usually tell, if it's a couple, the person, work together, but the person who, doesn't get overwhelmed by the financial situation, because it's easy to get overwhelmed. And then when you're overwhelmed, you can't see clearly. And sometimes it's as simple as having a conversation with me where I say, okay, let's lay this out. Let's look at this. What do you see here? This is what I see here. And they go, oh, I didn't even look at it like that. So sometimes it's just as much of needing just a lifeline to somebody who helps you think things through a little bit and look at it from different perspectives. But the habit forming is early on. I mean, you're teaching your children early on. I have 3 now young adult children, and from very early on, I've taught them the power, not only the power of money, but the ability to think about money. What are we thinking about budget-wise? We don't walk into a store and just buy because we feel like it. We think it through a little bit more. And one time my kids actually said to me when they were teenagers, I really hate that my mom does this because she just talks about budgeting too much. So, but it's part of the habits. My children have an edge because of what I do, but you were not taught. I wasn't taught by my parents, and most people are not taught about how to manage money. I came from a generation that said, my father said, it's none of your business. You have a roof over your head and that's the end of it. So, I had to learn a lot of it on my own, and most people have to learn it. So you can easily get into bad habits.
But you would agree, though, Leslie, and correct me if you don't. All of this begins with what I call a spending plan, what you're calling a budget. In other words, seeing where your money's going now, seeing how much is coming in, seeing how much is going out, and where that money's going. That's where everything starts. Agree?
Agreed. You could call it a spending plan. You could call it a budget. You can put any name you want on it. But the spending, you have to look at the numbers. You have to know that every other week or once a month, because clients get paid so differently, once a month, weekly, daily, every other week. How are you being paid and what money is coming in? What's the net income? Not the gross income. Gross is before taxes. And then at different times of the year, the numbers change because in early part of the year, you might see less in your paycheck than you do later part of the year when most of the taxes have been paid out, or maybe you maxed out on certain tax requirements. So you have to look at that 100%.
Tell me this. Explain the snowball method. I mean, is that a good way to start paying off debt? Let's assume for a moment that I have sufficient income and I have a handle on my expenses, and I want to now attack the debt that I have. Is a snowball method a way that you would go about doing that? And if so, would you explain it for us?
Again, I don't think that one method is the right way to do it. So, when I'm looking at an individual's finances, I'm saying, okay, so do they have high interest? Do they have high debt? What are we looking at? Where is the money best spent? So if you're looking at where the money is best spent, perhaps this month you needed a new, it's hot out. So in most of the country, so maybe you needed an air conditioner. And so you had no choice but to use the money to buy an air conditioner, but you didn't have enough money on your credit card to do that. So you ended up taking the money out of your savings account. So, again, there's so many things that interfere with making the decision of what makes sense. Should you pay down the high interest? Sometimes no, but and sometimes it makes sense. Like if you're going to prioritize, you want to make sure that you are prioritizing the debts that you need to live off of. So if you're living off credit cards, you want to ask yourself, why am I living off credit cards? Where's the problem? Because you could say, all right, I'm going to pay down the high debt or the high balances, but why do you have high interest rate? Why do you have high debt? And the underlying issue is really where it comes in to resolve it. So you could tackle it one way or another, but it'll perpetuate if you don't get why. So if you're using credit cards as part of your cash flow because you don't have enough money coming in, you could from today until tomorrow, you could try to pay down the high interest, but you're not going to because you don't have enough money. So you're only making minimum payments. So the method is useless if it's not looked at strategically. So the underlying issue, which usually is cash flow. So if you have extra cash and you are able to pay things down, assuming that's the case, then you might want to say, why do I have so many credit cards? Does that make sense? Do I have good credit? Should I consolidate those into maybe a balance transfer if I have really good credit? Is that an option for me? That might make more sense than paying 5, 10, or 12 clients with 25 different credit cards. So that might be an option. Now using the money this month, okay, it's the beginning of the summer. Are you a teacher or, is it going to be a situation where over the next 2 months you're not being paid? So therefore you're not getting a paycheck. Then you might have to shift that priority. So again, even though there are these methods, there's so much more gray in between on making them work. And that's why people end up with me, because they look at these methods and they say, I've tried this and I've tried that and nothing works. I can't figure it out, because it's self-medicating. You can walk into a drugstore and you can buy 25 different cold medicines, but do you really have a cold? And is that really the proper medicine? And you try to read the packet, to cover up the symptoms, but you're not getting to the underlying issue. It's the same thing in debt. If you don't get to the underlying issue, none of the methods are going to work.
Interesting. What about credit counseling?
So credit counseling is a consumer credit counseling, generally not for profit. There's a lot of different uses for that. Sometimes in the bankruptcy arena, there's credit counseling if you want advice. And then there's credit counseling where you go in and they can renegotiate with some of your creditors for a lower interest rate, not a zero interest rate. While it does work under certain circumstances, again, when you're looking for a solution, you have to understand what the problem is. So if you have a cash flow issue, and you can't meet your financial obligations, that's not going to do anything for you, reducing the interest rate. So you might need to reduce the principal. So before seeking out a solution, you have to identify the issue, and most people can't. So we come in similar again, and I liken it again to like a doctor. We come in and we look and we diagnose what's the issue and what would be the best method. Sometimes as consumer credit counseling makes sense, but other times debt settlement makes more sense. Sometimes a bankruptcy really is the way you have to go, but you need somebody to diagnose it and look at the issues. And sometimes people come in and they say, I'm looking for a bankruptcy. And we say, why are you looking for a bankruptcy? And they say, because I can't pay my bills anymore. And I say, why can't you pay your bills? And we look at it. I had somebody call me the other day about it, and she lives in the city. And I said, so how are you living in the city, in New York City? That's a very, very expensive place to live. So what's the income? And why are you not working? Well, I'm not going to take a job, that's under what I'm willing to work for. I said, you're not going to have a hard time, making that argument in front of a federal bankruptcy judge that you don't feel that you should take a job to pay your bills because it's beneath you. So that's a tough argument. So again, when we uncover and unravel what's happening, then you can find the best method.
But now let's stop here for a minute too, because this is something people are often very, very confused about, is the difference between credit counseling and debt settlement. Please explain the difference between these two things.
Night and day, completely different. Debt settlement is where you come in and you're going to renegotiate the balances and the interest rate. When you're renegotiating the balances, the principal balance is what you owe. So you owe 10 grand on your credit card and you're paying 18% interest. A debt settlement plan would work where you go in and you're not making payments anymore to the creditor, so you're delinquent, and you go in and you negotiate that for less than the $10,000 interest free. That's basically debt settlement, where you're settling it for less than what's owed. Consumer credit counseling service or credit counseling works differently. It's a participation process with the creditor. The creditor has to agree to it. And it's usually a reduction in the interest, not in principal balance. And usually you're taking the interest rate from 18, 20% and making it 9% or 10%, and you're paying over 5 years. But you're still paying the principal balance. So you'll still pay $10,000 plus interest over the period of time, versus the debt settlement where interest will stop generally and you will reduce the balance. But, there's a lot of caveats. Both have to be done right. If when they're not done right, it's like a firecracker. It'll just blow your hand off.
So now it would appear to me that the debt settlement would be better, because then I'm paying less than I owed.
Generally, yes. In my experience, generally, yes. Some people don't want to necessarily go through that process, or they weren't exposed to debt settlement, or they were exposed to it, but they were given all kinds of, oh, you shouldn't do this because of that. So they felt like, also, consumer credit counseling falls under what's called not-for-profit. So many consumers think, oh, it's not-for-profit, so I can go do that. Not-for-profit doesn't mean that the people who run it don't get paid. It's just it's a tax filing status, but that the people who work there and run it still get paid. So there are some volunteer processes, but most of the time there's still a payment process. In the debt settlement, there's so much negative press about debt settlement, and in many cases, rightly so. Because again, when it's not done right, the consumer is really disadvantaged. But when it is done right, it is extremely successful. Both will impact your credit. However, in the debt settlement, from my experience, the way we do it, my clients' credit scores go back over 700 while they're with us. So again, when it's done right and it's done appropriately, the credit score issue could be managed, tax issues are managed, payment plans are managed, and there's a lot more control. And it is a very successful process.
Interesting, because I too have seen over the years as a consumer reporter that there are a lot of bad characters in the debt settlement business, and debt settlement
there are and still are, unfortunately.
Yeah, and people's credit gets ruined in debt settlement, right? Because at least
I wouldn't say ruined. I would say, damn it.
We did a whole episode on how my credit was ruined by an accidental debt settlement situation that I thought was debt consolidation. So I think when we're going through these different these different options or tools or whatever you want to call them, it really is important to have somebody like Leslie or some other professional who understands these things to be able to guide you and keep you on track, because there are all of these terms and all of these tools that people like to use. I thought I was signing a debt consolidation loan, but it turned out I was signing debt settlement paperwork, and I didn't find out about it until 3 years in, and I was being sued and my credit had been destroyed. So I think
you bring up a really good point, and I really want to talk about that for a second. So most consumers don't know what debt consolidation means. So they think that, I'm going to consolidate my debt. And if you call many 800 numbers or you're solicited, those are call centers, and they're selling you a product. And when they're selling you a product, you don't know that as the consumer. And debt consolidation is a very broad term. It encompasses debt settlement. It encompasses loans. It can encompass bankruptcy, credit counseling. It's an umbrella term for a lot of things. And as a consumer, many consumers don't get that. They say, I want to consolidate my debt, but they don't really know what that means. And when you call up an 800 number, you saw it on television, you heard it on the radio, you got something in the mail, you got an email about it, and it sounds like this big, great company, and you call them up, that is a sales call. You're calling a sales center, and they sell, your call goes to one agency and another call goes to another. And then what they end up doing is that's just the front end, and they're salespeople, and they're telling you and they're talking about it. And then on the back end, it gets serviced by a different company. And I've seen some of these agreements come through my office from clients like you who thought they were doing something, and then all of a sudden they got sued, and they said, "Sorry, we can't help you anymore because you got sued." And and by the way, all the payments you've been making over 24 months, we took most of that money. So, and you're not going to get it back because see you bye, and good luck getting money back from us. And so most consumers, unfortunately, get drawn in by the solicitations, the television commercials, the things like the emails that come. And because some of it contains information that's been bought and sold, they don't realize that through the credit reporting bureaus, you can buy the information and then use it as a solicitation. You can pull it off. Public data will give you all this information, and it's very clever marketing and very clever salespeople who haven't explained to you what it is that you're getting yourself into. And it's electronic signatures now. So what we see in many of the debt world is everything is signed electronically, so nobody's actually reading it. Autofill. It autofills the entire agreement, and the consumer never reads it. So, and has no idea what they got themselves into until further down the road. And you thought you were doing the right thing in consolidating your debt, and you were, but through debt settlement. And so it's like the chapter is debt consolidation, but the subchapter is you are doing a debt settlement program. And so that's why you ended up with that problem. Now, if it's done right, even if you were sued, it could be settled. All of the debt issues that you had through debt settlement could be resolved and settled, pulling your credit score back to over 700. So it'll drop in that plan. It'll also drop in debt consolidation if you took a loan, if you thought you were taking a loan. Anytime you take out new credit, your credit score is going to drop for several reasons. One, it's being checked for credit. And two, you're moving money from one place to another in a credit forum. And that, as a result, that gets reported. And that's going to wreak havoc on your credit score. And if you don't have a great credit score to begin with, 680, 640, it's going to drop pretty low. Even if you have 720, it's going to drop under any of those circumstances. In the best of circumstances, 50, 75 points. In the worst of circumstances, bankruptcy, you'll take that credit to under 600. But in done the right way and massaged the right way and managed appropriately, all of that can be brought back up. And honestly, in order to have good credit, and I tell people this all the time, in order to have no debt and good credit, you have to resolve the debt issue. If you continue to just pay your bills, but you have a lot of debt and your debt to income ratio is off, your utilization is high, your credit score is never coming up, and you're teetering on the edge. And when you're teetering on the edge of having no cash flow and very little credit, what good does it do you to have a 750, 780, or 800 credit score? It doesn't do any good. You need to have cash flow, money in the bank, savings, and the credit score can be secondary to that because it will offset the need for the credit.
Okay, now, I've done literally countless stories on debt over the years. I've been doing this for 30 years. This is the first time, other than a bankruptcy lawyer, that I've been talking to a lawyer about this. Usually it's credit counseling organizations that I've talked to. How much does it cost for me to use services like yours? Because essentially what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie, what I'm hearing you say is there are lots of different options. Here's somebody who's an expert who's not committed to any certain path that's going to help me choose the right one. Is that basically what how you would describe yourself?
Yeah, so I am a unique, I'm a little bit of a unicorn because it's not a practice area that most attorneys go into. It's not taught in law school. It's not a practice area that, first of all, it's not extremely desirable in a lot of ways. And it is a very challenging industry. I face the most challenging clients that any of my colleagues face. And it took 25 years to build this business at a very difficult industry. So I am a bit of a unicorn where my practice is completely focused on debt resolution. We do consumer debt, but we also do a lot of merchant cash advance, business debt, and student loans and other things, but all debt focused. So it doesn't cost more to work with me. In fact, in many cases, it costs less because it's one stop shop where we are managing the credit issues, the legal issues, the creditor issues, and everything in one stop. We work on a fee basis that is structured within a payment plan. So the client is not billed hourly. So again, unlike typical lawyers, we don't hourly bill. And we don't charge the way typical lawyers do. So we structure it where it's very favorable to the client to make it work, and it doesn't cost more. In many cases, most of the debt that we're settling includes they pay back less than the principal balance owed, including fees. So it's a very the program and the processes that I've designed and developed over the years is a very, very successful process, and not one where someone's going to come in and go, "Oh my God, I'm going to have astronomical legal fees." That's not the case at all.
It sounds like you lean towards debt settlement. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
no doubt.
Why is that? I mean, why not use credit counseling?
Debt settlement is extremely successful. It resolves the underlying issue, cash flow. They don't have enough cash flow to meet the obligations. Therefore, they're close to the balances aren't going down. Maybe they're already behind. And it's extremely successful in reducing and eliminating the debt in a short period of time, 1 to 5 years, which is a very short period of time. It increases the credit score. It doesn't have long-term effects on the credit. And it allows the client to have more cash flow during the process, and also helps the client wean themselves away from relying on credit cards as their day-to-day go-to usage.
Now, when you do credit counseling, you agree not to use credit cards while you're paying off that debt, right?
That may be, but we don't do consumer credit counseling here.
Oh, so you basically only do debt settlement.
We only do, well, not just debt settlement. We do other debt types of plans, but debt settlement is a big part of the practice and solution, especially when we're talking about consumer-based debt like credit card debt.
So give me an example of how much it would cost me if I come in with $20,000 of debt and I want to try to settle it because I can no longer make
probably about $4,000.
I'm sorry?
Probably around $4,000.
Okay.
Probably about $4,000. It'll cost you to take care of that over the course of 2 to 4 years. It's not unreasonable. And if we settled it for $10,000 plus the $4,000, and with the amortization schedule, you're plus $6,000 plus the interest, the amortization schedule of what that would cost over the next 4 years. So you're probably at $7,000 or $8,000 savings.
Okay, cool. Now, could I do that myself? Could I call let's make it simple and say I owe all this money to one credit card, $20,000. Could I call them myself and say, I can either give you $10,000 or I'll just file bankruptcy and you'll get nothing?
No, that's not. They don't care if you tell them they're going to file bankruptcy because they can file a claim. And it's just like the boy who cried wolf. No creditor cares if you're going to file bankruptcy anymore, or if you say you're going to file bankruptcy, because if you don't file bankruptcy, then you have no credibility with them and you just lied to them. And just like many people do, and they then have no patience for you. And then, they're taking notes on the conversation. So they can check bankruptcy.
How do you settle the debt then? What are you saying to them that make them take $10,000 when they're owed 20?
I am not telling them my client is filing bankruptcy. I've been doing this so long that they know who I am after all this time. And there's timing with every creditor. Every single creditor resolves debt differently. And depending on where it goes, and in many cases, American Express, Discover, send their accounts out to different various collection agencies and law firms. And depending on where that debt ends up is going to depend on what the solution is. So just understanding the industry, just understanding the timing, like with Chase Bank, what the timing is. You can call Chase Bank up after missing a payment and they're going to tell you, sorry, click, we're not settling your debt. So, and most creditors will. So a lot of it is understanding the timing of when debt settlement can occur, what numbers we're looking for, what terms we're looking for, and at what agency it goes to for us to then make the best decision. So it's experience and really understanding the industry and the creditors really, really well.
Cool. Okay, we're going to have to wrap this up, but before we do, or as we do, let me go back to the title of this podcast, which is 3 Steps to Take If Your Debts Are Out of Control, and that's basically something you don't have to exactly have 3 steps, but are there steps you could take to summarize this whole conversation, Leslie? If your debts are out of control, what steps, real specifically and real short, would you take?
Okay, there are 3 steps. The first is awareness. You need to be aware you have a problem and your debts are out of control, and you need to come to grips with that and say, okay, I have a problem and I need to find a solution. Next, figuring out the underlying issue, which is usually figuring out what the cash flow is. What funds do I have available to resolve my debt so I can then determine the best solution? And then I really believe in reaching out to a professional to say, hey, here's my challenge. What do you think, and how can you help me? I'm a big fan of finding those that specialize in their area of expertise to help me get from point A to point B in the fastest, most economical, and with the least amount of impact on me. So I think those are the 3 steps that you take. And then finally, the final one really would be pulling the trigger, not sitting on the fence, because I have lots of people who call me 9 months later, a year later, and say, oh, I should have done this a year ago. Make a decision once you come up and you do your research and you find what's best for you, and go with your instinct. If your gut doesn't feel good about the solution and you don't like who you're talking to, or you feel pressure in any way where they want money up front from you, or you're not speaking to a professional who's providing you with real expertise, don't sign. Walk away and find another solution.
That's great. Actually, one of the pieces of advice that I've always given people too is when you're talking to anybody, whether it be a credit counselor, debt settlement company, whoever it is, if they sound like a salesman, hang up. If they sound like a counselor, fine. But a lot of these people, they're hardcore salespeople.
They are salespeople, and they're reading off a script. And the other thing I tell people is, if they've given you advice without understanding your financial circumstances, do this, close your bank account, do that, do this, close this, do that. I tell my clients when I talk to them, I said, nobody's had any chance to look at your financial circumstances, but yet they're giving you very specific advice, but they haven't looked at it yet. I said, that's no good. So again, red flags to look for. And it's important in this arena because as we said earlier, there are a lot of bad apples that have spoiled it for the rest in the past, but there are a lot of good eggs. You just have to find those, and you have to be comfortable with who you're working with, and it has to work for you. And don't just sign or feel pressure. If anybody's pressuring you in this area, that's the last thing you need.
Yep, that's right. You guys have anything else, Miranda or Aaron?
I do just kind of want to point out one of the things that Leslie said that I thought was really interesting, because after my credit was destroyed through not, thinking I was doing a debt consolidation loan, signing the paperwork that they sent me for an electronic signature, and ending up in a debt settlement situation, I still had the cash flow. I still had the resources. So even with my destroyed debt, my destroyed credit, I was still able to get an apartment, even though I had to pay a slightly higher security deposit. I was still able to buy my son a used car with cash. So what she says about paying attention to the rest of your finances and not just focusing on your credit score through this whole process is also, I think, something important to remember as we move forward.
And another thing too that occurs to me is that there's debt settlement companies. Leslie is an independent expert on this, and then there's Consumer Credit Counseling Service, which has been around for a million years. Disclosure: I used to be on the board of Consumer Credit Counseling Service, a local one here in South Florida. So I am partial to those people. But at any rate, what I was going to say was that you can talk to different people too. They're not charging you to call up Consumer Credit Counseling Service, and presumably Leslie wouldn't charge you to call her, just at least for an initial consultation, I assume. So
correct. It's all free. You should be able to have a conversation, and that's where you should feel comfortable. I speak to almost every single potential client that comes through the door, not only for screening purposes, but so that I establish a relationship. They understand that there is somebody at my level overseeing the process. And that obviously that's very time consuming for me to do that. But I do think it's really important to properly inform a client before they become a client as to the whole process and procedure, and really see whether it's something that we can help them with. And you should be able to speak to anybody and call around to different services, even different attorneys and different services, and see where you feel comfortable.
Yep, that's true of virtually any service, from a doctor to a mechanic to a debt person. Call them up, talk to them, see what they sound like. You can tell when people are on your team and when they're not, but you can't until you talk to lots of them, or not lots of them, but several of them at least.
A few, yes.
Then you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? By talking to people.
I agree with you.
Cool. Leslie, you're wonderful. I can tell that you're a New York City attorney, I have to say.
I would imagine what gave it away, that the accent.
Well, in this case, I can't imagine a person I'd rather have on my team than a hard-charging New York attorney like yourself. So
you know how many people tell me that, especially my clients from out of state. They're like, "Oh, I feel so at home listening to that New York accent."
Okay, guys, I am afraid we're out of time, folks, but we are never out of topic. Dig a little deeper. You're going to find links to lots more info in our show notes. And remember, we're not giving financial advice here. It may sound like it, but we're not, because we don't know you personally, so we're not. So make sure to do your own research, consult your own experts before acting on anything that you might have heard on this podcast. And also, if you like what we do, then do something for us. Like our podcast. Tell your friends. Get us some more listeners, would you? And if your goal is to make more, to spend less, and to retire rich, your home is moneytalksnews.com. And don't forget to check out Miranda's online home as well. That is mirandamarquit.com. And visit Leslie at her website. That is attorney-newyork.com?
Yes, attorney-New York spelled out, or Tayne Law, TAYNELAW.com.
Cool. And you're gonna be in our show notes, so we're gonna have your link there if anybody wants to talk to you, and we hope that they do. I guess that's all we've got. Leslie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Stacey Johnson.
I'm Miranda Marquit.
I'm Aaron Freeman.
Thanks for being with us, guys. We're going to see you right here next time.